Welcome to the English Breakthrough for Germans podcast. I'm Mike, and I'm an Australian English and German teacher and trainer and language coach with C2 German, and I help German speakers become confident in English and feel comfortable using English, da ich finde, dass das nicht etwas nur sein sollte, was für sogenannte Sprachtalente ist. Alright, so in this podcast, actually, normally I discuss learning strategies, but there's something that I want to talk about that's a little bit different today, something that's been on my mind for a little while, probably more or less since I arrived in Germany. So this topic is overdubbing and movies in German. So English language movies which were recorded in English and made in English, but then overdubbed into German, so you can listen to the German language while watching an American movie. So many people in Germany and abroad are aware that countries like the Netherlands, Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Norway, people in these countries speak really good English, but in Germany the standard of English is not quite as high. And one really obvious reason for this, a lot of people are aware of, is the presence of overdubbing in movies and in TV. So overdubbing, as I said, is where you can watch an American or an English language movie and the dialogue is re-recorded in German over the top. So you can listen to German while you're watching Brad Pitt or George Clooney or actors like that. And the word overdubbing comes from a technique which is used in recording studios when you have recorded something and you would like to overdub something over the top. Or it's maybe added to the original as well. So why is it that overdubbing is so much more common in Germany than in other countries like the Scandinavian countries? So that's a question I'd like to go into a little bit more today. So to begin with, I'll tell you a little anecdote. This is something that happened to me that made me a little bit more aware of the situation. So this was a few months after I arrived in Germany. This was in 2011. So I was living in a WG, or we call it in English a flat share. So I was living in a flat share with two other young German girls in my first apartment in Berlin. And these two flatmates of mine had both lived in Paris before and were learning French. So they had a connection to each other because they both lived in France. And they actually also both had French boyfriends at the time too. So they were really, really interested in French culture. And one day they asked me if I would be interested in watching a movie with them. And the movie was Amélie. That's the title of it in English. In German, the title is Die fabelhafte Welt der Amélie. Maybe you've seen the movie before. So I had seen the movie before, and I really loved it when I watched it. I loved seeing the colors of Paris, the beautiful cafe culture, and also listening to French is something that's really, really special for Australians, actually, in general. And yeah, just everything about this movie is cute. There's just a lot of French culture there, French attitude, French fashion, food, things like that. So when Australians like myself think about Paris or think about France, it's really connected with this kind of cultural, special energy of living in Europe. And French is actually a very, very popular foreign language in schools in Australia as well. It's probably the most common European language which is taught in schools in Australia because it's seen as a language which represents this culture of Paris and of France. So yeah, when we watch movies like Amélie in Australia, we're just 90 minutes away, we are, what am I trying to say? We can watch a movie like this and we can take a journey away from our everyday lives, a 90-minute journey to Europe, to Paris, and we can experience another world, something that wouldn't otherwise be possible in Australia. We can feel surrounded by the exotic French culture, which is 16,000 kilometers away from Sydney, and it takes at least 24 hours to travel to Paris. So yeah, we can really have a little escape from our everyday lives. So yeah, when my flatmates asked me if I wanted to watch this movie with them, I was really happy to watch with them and to share this French connection because, as I said, they had lived in France as well. And I was new in Germany. I thought, oh yeah, of course, France is in Europe. That's another European country, something I haven't experienced. So let's do this together. So we sat down to watch the movie. And the movie doesn't immediately begin with dialogue. So there are some other things that are happening. There's the music. The music is really, really important in this movie. And I didn't notice anything strange, but as soon as people started speaking in the movie, instead of hearing French, this beautiful language of this colorful city, the language of romance, they were speaking in German. I thought, what? German? Why on earth would you watch this movie in German? This is a French movie. Why would you watch it in any other language apart from French? So this made absolutely no sense to me. So in this moment, I asked them to pause the movie, and I said, why are we watching this in German? And they said, well, our French is not good enough to watch it in French, so we want to be able to understand it. But I thought to myself, why weren't they watching it in French with German subtitles? So they are listening to French and reading in German. French and the French language is such a big part of this culture. So wouldn't they want to hear French while they're watching it? And yeah, this was a question that really has accompanied me for a long time, because as I said, in Australia, it's completely logical that you would watch a French movie in French and just have the subtitles so you can read along. And I was going to have lots and lots of conversations with lots of different people about this exact topic. So as I mentioned before, overdubbing is not so common in Scandinavia or in the Netherlands, where people tend to speak English better than in Germany, I would say. So what is it about Germany that is unique? What makes Germany special in this way? Why is it that in Germany, overdubbing is much more popular than in other countries? So let's talk about that a little bit now. So for this podcast, I did a little bit of research and tried to find some information, and this is what I've got for you here. So one of the biggest factors in this topic, and where it all began, seems to be around the time of World War II. So during World War II, there was a halt in production of movies, of course. You know, there were other things going on. And after World War II, there was high demand for cultural entertainment. So things like going to the cinema and to the theatre. And one way of getting people to the cinema, of course, was to show movies, but there weren't that many German language movies at the time. So they wanted to be able to show English language movies, for example, or movies in other languages. And at this time, there was a preference for overdubbing instead of using subtitles because it made the movies more accessible. People who maybe can't read as well, for example, would be able to listen to the dialogue and still follow the movie. And also at this time, the sound quality and the general film quality wasn't very advanced, right? So changing the sound of the language didn't really take much away from the overall quality of the film and movie experience, I would say. Whereas these days, obviously, it's much different, and there are other factors. This also had the happy effect of promoting American culture, which I think was a bonus politically as well in West Germany. Okay, so another big factor is that the size of the German-speaking world in Europe is much bigger than other languages. So with Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, there are about 100 million native German speakers, which is a much higher number, of course, than the population of speakers of Norwegian or Swedish living in Norway or Sweden. Sweden has a population of about 10 million, and Norway only has a population of about 5.5 million. So due to the larger population of Germany and the German-speaking countries, Germany also has a larger number of cinema screens. So Germany has 4,842 cinema screens, whereas Sweden only has 847. So just under 5,000 versus 800. So of course, this means it's not as economically worthwhile to invest as much money in overdubbing in this industry in countries like Sweden or Norway than it is in Germany. So there's a much bigger market in Germany, in the German-speaking countries. So more money can be made from overdubbed movies, which means that there's a bigger budget to make higher quality overdubbed movies, overdubbed versions of movies. All right, and the next reason for this is this became the audience expectation. So after World War II, there were these circumstances that led to it being the case that it was overdubbing over subtitles, and then people became really used to this in Germany, and it became expected by the audiences as well. So people would prefer to choose a movie and listen to the actors speaking German or listen to German with the overdubbing than they would to read the subtitles, even though reading subtitles is considered normal in countries like Australia and other countries. All right, but overdubbing is not always the best thing, and there are some problems with it. Sometimes it's not super effective, or it sounds inauthentic. So I'm going to go through some issues that I believe exist with overdubbing, and some things that I have found as well. Okay, so I've found sometimes when I'm watching a movie which has been overdubbed, it doesn't quite sound natural to me. So what I mean is you might have two people walking down the beach or in a forest or something like that, and it sounds like the person is sitting right next to you and speaking into your ear. And this can sound a little bit inauthentic. So when the sound for a movie is recorded generally, it's usually recorded on set. So imagine, as I said in this example, with two people walking down a beach. If they're having a conversation at the beach, the dialogue will typically be recorded using a big, long microphone that somebody holds above the heads of the speakers. And of course, you can't see this in the shot in the camera. But when overdubs are recorded, this sound is recorded in a recording studio, which is a very, very different sound and acoustic environment to a beach. So it sounds very, very dry. You know, you don't get sounds like wind or wave sounds, and perhaps it sounds a little bit less emotional as well. Sometimes they can add different effects. They can make it artificially sound like they're in a church or in a big open space. But due to budget restrictions, sometimes that might not be possible to try to make it sound as authentic as possible. Okay, another issue with overdubbing. Overdubbing can make dialogue easier to understand because it's recorded so carefully, but this means that it can be difficult if you go back to a regular movie which is not overdubbed. So for example, if you're a German speaker and you're used to watching overdubbed movies in English, if you then go back to a German language movie which isn't overdubbed and it was originally made in German, it can become a little bit more difficult to understand. You might think that the speakers don't speak as clearly. Yeah, okay. So another issue with overdubbed movies, it can be difficult technically for the voice actors to match the voice to the movement of the mouth. So they have to watch the movie on TV or on a screen, and then they will speak the lines and try to do it exactly in time with the voice, with the scene of the movie. So they need to watch it carefully and make sure it matches the mouth movements and the lip movements. Something like I love you, so ich liebe dich. Apparently that's quite easy to match up, a little phrase like that, but some more complex sentences can be more difficult for the voice actors to reproduce in German more accurately. Another factor is it can be difficult to match the facial expressions of the speaker. So in German, the main emphasis or the stress might be in a different syllable in the German sentence. And so if somebody raises their eyebrows or puts their arms in the air at a certain point in the sentence, that kind of thing can also be difficult to recreate in the new language. And another point which is not specific to the film industry, but which is important to translation in general, is it's actually quite difficult to translate things well all the time. So things might need to be culturally adapted. Things might need to be changed. So, for example, in Harry Potter, the Weasley house is called the burrow in English, which is a hole for animals like rabbits. And in German, it's called der Fuchsbau, right? So that works. It's not the same thing, but it sounds similar and it has a similar feeling to it. But some culturally specific things might not be able to be translated very well. When I was a kid, I read a lot of Asterix books, and this is something that is famously translated very, very well into different languages. And you can see that by looking at the characters, some of the characters in the book of Asterix in the village. So there is a druid. A druid is the guy that makes the magic potion. In German, he's called Miraculix. In English, it's called Get a Fix. Get a fix means to have your fix of drugs. It's kind of like a little cheeky way to say that you have your, something that is really good, something that gives you a lot of dopamine. Get a fix. Idefix, the dog, in English is called dogmatics, dogmatisch, right? Which is really quite funny. Majestix is called vital statistics. And verleinigs is called unhygienics, so unhygienisch, you could say. So these names are different, but they are translated very, very well and have a similar kind of feeling and humor. All right, guys, I'm going to come to the end of the podcast now. I hope you've been enjoying the episode. It's been a fun one to make and research. Actually, it's been a slightly different topic today, so I hope you've enjoyed that. If you are enjoying the podcast, don't forget to head over to my Patreon learning community, which I'm just starting to develop at the moment, and you can have a look at that. And there I'm going to give you some extra listening practice, some vocabulary tips and things, and you can also ask me some questions about the episode. The link for that is in the podcast description. All right, thanks again for listening. I hope you have a fantastic week and enjoy whatever you're doing in the summer. Take care. Bye-bye.